James Holloway was the kind of man people read about in business magazines: young, brilliant, and incredibly wealthy. By the age of 32, he had built a tech empire from the ground up, turning a simple cybersecurity app into a billion-dollar enterprise. But beyond the media headlines and flashy numbers, James was a grounded man who valued the quiet over the chaos of fame. His greatest pride wasn't his bank account or the sprawling estate nestled in the hills of Connecticut, it was his wife, Isla. Isla Holloway, formerly Isla Bennett, had once been a schoolteacher before fate brought her into James's world. Their love story wasn't one of tabloids or scandals. It was genuine, an encounter at a bookstore cafe that turned into deep, meaningful conversations, slow dates, and eventually, a whirlwind romance that neither could resist. Now, married and expecting their first child, James and Isla were living what many would call a perfect life. The estate they shared was not just luxurious, it was filled with warmth, with walls lined in family photos, a nursery being prepared upstairs, and laughter that echoed through wide, sunlit halls. Their friends admired the couple. Isla's kindness balanced James's intellect, and their bond was admired at every dinner party, charity gala, or weekend retreat they hosted. Isla had quickly become the heart of their circle, adored for her gentle nature and unwavering loyalty. James often said she was his calm in a storm, his peace in a world of high-stakes business meetings and demanding investors. Yet, beneath the surface of this fairy tale life was a cold shadow that never seemed to disappear: James's mother, Victoria Holloway. A woman of old money and even older grudges, Victoria had never approved of Isla. From the moment James introduced her, Victoria's distaste was clear. She didn't shout or argue, her rejection was subtle, sharp, and icy. "She's nice," Victoria would say, her lips tight and her eyes scanning Isla's modest jewelry or her soft-spoken words. But her meaning was always clear: Isla wasn't one of them. She wasn't worthy. Victoria had spent her life building James into a legacy, a man who could carry the Holloway name into generations of prestige and power. In her eyes, Isla was a threat to that. And while James tried to keep the peace for years, hoping his mother would eventually accept his wife, he had begun to realize that Victoria's disapproval wasn't temporary. It was rooted deep, dangerous, and entirely unforgiving. The baby shower was meant to be a celebration, a moment of joy, laughter, and shared anticipation as Isla prepared to welcome her first child. The backyard of the Holloway estate had been transformed into a floral wonderland, with white tents draped in blush-pink linens, tables adorned with fresh roses, and strings of fairy lights overhead casting a magical glow. Isla, radiant in a soft lavender dress that flowed gently over her baby bump, moved through the crowd of smiling guests with grace and quiet happiness. But beneath the layers of sweetness, tension simmered. Victoria Holloway arrived late, unannounced, and without a gift. She made her entrance as if she owned the very air people breathed, her icy presence slicing through the warmth like a blade. Conversations quieted as she passed. Isla's smile faltered the moment she saw her mother-in-law step onto the patio, wearing a stark black dress as though in silent protest of the occasion. James wasn't home, he had gone into the city for an emergency meeting, and Isla was alone in facing her. Victoria didn't bother with pleasantries. She waited until Isla was alone near the dessert table, then stepped forward, her voice low and cutting. "You don't belong here," she whispered, her eyes narrowing. "All this circus, it's not for you. You fooled James, but I see right through you." Isla stiffened, her hands protectively resting on her belly. "This is my home, Victoria. And this is our baby. I'm not going anywhere." Victoria leaned closer, her expression hardening. "I won't let you destroy him. You've already taken him from me. I won't let you ruin his future." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Isla trembling. The confrontation had been brief, but the venom in Victoria's words lingered like poison in the air. Isla excused herself quietly, slipping upstairs to gather herself before calling James. Her voice wavered as she told him what had happened, but her resolve was unshaken. "I won't let her intimidate me," she said. "But you need to know how far she's willing to go." James was silent for a moment on the other end, then sighed heavily. "Enough is enough," he said. I'm done trying to fix this. From now on, she's out of our lives." That decision, while empowering, sent Victoria over the edge. She had always believed she could manipulate, guilt, or pressure her son back under her control. But now, it was Isla who had his loyalty, his love, and soon, his child. Victoria felt abandoned, humiliated, and dethroned. Her world, where she ruled as the unchallenged matriarch, was crumbling. In her isolation, Victoria's thoughts turned dark. Her resentment twisted into obsession. She began to see Isla not as a person, but as a threat, something poisonous that had to be eliminated. She convinced herself she wasn't being cruel, she was protecting her son, rescuing him from a life built on lies. And with chilling clarity, Victoria made a silent vow: Isla would be removed from James's life. Permanently. It was a quiet morning, the kind Isla loved most, when the light filtered softly through the bedroom windows and the birds outside stirred before the world had truly awakened. James had left early for a board meeting downtown, kissing her forehead gently before heading out. Isla had smiled, half asleep, murmuring something about craving blueberry pancakes. But by mid-morning, something was wrong. James tried calling her around noon. No answer. He brushed it off, assuming she was napping or out in the garden. But when his calls continued to go straight to voicemail and his messages remained unread, an unsettling knot formed in his stomach. He called the housekeeper. No one had seen Isla all day. Her car was still in the garage. Her phone was on the kitchen counter. Her handbag lay on the dining table untouched. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. By the time James raced home, he was barely able to breathe. He tore through the house, checking every room, calling her name again and again, his voice echoing with increasing desperation. Her slippers still sat by the bedside. A cup of tea had gone cold in the living room. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass or overturned furniture, just an eerie stillness that made his skin crawl. Panic set in quickly. He called the police, his voice shaky and choked. He spared no detail, insisting this wasn't just a missing persons case. His pregnant wife wouldn't disappear without reason. He contacted private investigators as well, determined to leave no stone unturned. The media caught wind of the story, and headlines soon lit up with speculation. Millionaire's pregnant wife missing, mystery deepens. Days passed, agonizing and slow. James barely slept, existing on caffeine and hope. The police found no credible leads. Surveillance footage around the property showed nothing suspicious. The tech in their security system had been disabled for a 6-hour window, something done manually. Whoever had taken Isla knew exactly what they were doing. Then, on the 4th day, a letter arrived. No return address, just a neatly folded piece of paper slipped under the front gate. James's hands trembled as he opened it. The message was typed in bold black font. "She's safe for now. Forget her, and you'll be fine. Keep searching, and you both lose." There was no signature, no demand for money, no further instructions. Just a quiet threat that made James's blood run cold. He sank to the ground, the letter falling from his fingers. His mind raced. Who could do this? Who would? But beneath the whirlwind of thoughts, one name kept surfacing like a dark current pulling him under. Victoria. He hadn't spoken to her since the baby shower. She hadn't even reached out after the news of Isla's disappearance broke. No phone call, no message, no attempt to comfort or offer help. It was her silence, more than anything, that screamed guilt. James knew his mother. He knew how deep her hatred could go, and how far she'd be willing to push to reclaim control. Now, his worst fears were crystallizing into an unbearable truth. She had taken Isla, and James would stop at nothing to bring her back. James knew that waiting for the police to solve the case was a luxury he couldn't afford. Their pace was slow, tangled in procedures and red tape, and though well-meaning, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Victoria Holloway wasn't just any grieving mother-in-law, she was cunning, connected, and deeply manipulative. If she truly had Isla, she would have left no easy trail. But James knew something else too. No matter how careful Victoria thought she was, she wasn't invincible. So, he played along. He sat through meetings with detectives, answered their questions, and pretended to trust the process. But behind closed doors, he was orchestrating his own parallel investigation, one that didn't rely on warrants or protocol. He started with her known contacts, family attorneys, former staff, and a few of her old friends from elite social circles. Many of them hadn't heard from her in weeks, but one name stood out: Gerald Whitman, a retired banker and Victoria's longtime financial advisor. James had never liked the man. Too quiet, too polished. But he had always been fiercely loyal to Victoria. After a few discreet inquiries, James discovered that Whitman had helped Victoria set up several offshore accounts, some of which were still active and funneling small, irregular amounts of money. That was the first thread. The next came when he hired a hacker named Eli, an old contact from his earliest startup days who owed him a favor. Eli didn't ask too many questions. Within hours, he had bypassed encrypted channels Victoria had been using to send hidden communications. Most were coded messages, likely to staff or collaborators, routed through a private server. But one email stood out. It was a forwarded land maintenance request for a remote property in upstate New York, an old countryside estate that had been in the Holloway family for generations but hadn't been used in over a decade. James felt the chill settle over him like a weight. It made perfect sense. The estate was secluded, forgotten by most, and still under Victoria's name. It was the perfect place to hide someone without suspicion. He stared at the image Eli sent, an aerial view of the sprawling grounds, thick with trees, the old manor house half covered in overgrowth. Isla could be in there. Alive. Alone. Waiting. James prepared himself. He packed a small duffel bag, flashlight, bolt cutters, burner phone, cash, and a gun he had kept locked away for years. He wasn't the kind of man who believed violence solved anything, but he wasn't naive anymore. If Victoria had gone this far, he couldn't afford to be unarmed. Emotionally, he braced himself too. He didn't know what he would find, what condition Isla would be in, or what Victoria might try to do when cornered. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just a rescue mission. This was war. And he was ready to face his mother like never before. The old mansion creaked with age, its halls silent except for the occasional groan of ancient wood settling into the earth. Hidden behind a concealed panel in the library, Isla lay on a narrow bed inside a dimly lit room that had once been used for storage. Now, it served a far darker purpose. There were no windows, only a small vent that let in slivers of air and the distant sounds of birds outside, mocking her with a reminder of freedom. Victoria visited her twice a day, always dressed immaculately, her voice calm and cold as ice. "James doesn't need you," she would say, sitting at the edge of the bed, brushing Isla's hair as if she were a fragile doll. "You've clouded his judgment. You poisoned his life. I'm doing this for him. He'll thank me when he sees clearly again." Isla, weakened by isolation and the stress of captivity, often felt like she was drowning in despair. But every time her hand rested on her growing belly, she found a flicker of strength. Her baby kicked gently, a reminder that she wasn't alone, that she had a purpose, and that giving in to Victoria's madness was not an option. "You're wrong," Isla whispered one evening, her voice barely above a breath. "He loves me. He'll come for me." Victoria's smile was thin and tight. "He's already forgotten you." But Isla didn't believe her. She refused to. Each day, when Victoria left the room, Isla would rise, legs trembling, and pace the room slowly. She counted steps, memorized cracks in the walls, tested the door, the hinges, anything she could use. She found scraps of paper, old receipts and brittle notebook pages left in boxes, and used a dull pencil she discovered behind a loose floorboard to scribble notes. "I'm here. Please help. Isla Holloway." She hid them inside vents, behind furniture, and one beneath the old mattress in case someone, anyone, ever came. She marked the paper with dates and tiny details of her surroundings, hoping to leave a trail like breadcrumbs through darkness. She clung to hope like it was oxygen. James was out there. And if she knew him at all, he wouldn't stop until he found her. She just had to hold on. James drove up the long, winding driveway to the Holloway estate just after dusk. The place hadn't changed much. Its towering stone walls and ivy-covered exterior still loomed with the same intimidating grandeur it had held in his childhood. But now, it felt more like the lair of a villain than a memory of home. He stepped out of the car slowly, deliberately, holding nothing but a small leather satchel and a bouquet of white lilies. A peace offering. Or at least, that's what he needed her to believe. Victoria opened the door herself, dressed in a crisp navy dress, her silver hair swept neatly back. Her smile was tight, unreadable. "James," she said coolly, eyeing the flowers. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," he replied, stepping inside with the calm of a son who had come to make amends. "I needed to see you. Alone." They sat briefly in the grand sitting room. She poured them both tea, her eyes watching him carefully over the rim of her porcelain cup. James made small talk, feigned weariness. "I've been thinking," he said softly. "Maybe I overreacted. Maybe. You were right about Isla." He swallowed the words like poison, but Victoria's eyes lit up. "I only ever wanted what was best for you," she murmured, placing her hand over his. James nodded, then let the silence stretch, giving her a false sense of ease. After a while, he excused himself to use the restroom, and slipped away down the corridor, retracing old childhood steps through the mansion. He moved quickly, his heart pounding. Every creak of the floorboards felt deafening. He checked locked doors, glanced behind portraits, searching for anything that felt out of place. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic knock. Once. Then twice. Then silence. He froze, holding his breath. It came again, muffled but deliberate, behind the library wall. James turned toward the towering shelves of dusty books. A memory sparked. His father had once shown him a hidden panel behind the third shelf. He pushed aside the books, ran his fingers along the molding, and clicked the hidden latch. The wall creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway cloaked in shadow. At the end of it, a single light flickered behind a locked door. From within, another knock. Louder this time. "Isla," he whispered. A sob cracked through the door. "James." He didn't waste a second, kicked the door with everything he had until it burst open. There she was. Pale, exhausted, but alive. Tears streamed down her face as she rushed into his arms, clutching him tightly. But before they could speak, a sharp voice cut through the air behind them. "I told you to forget her," Victoria snarled from the hallway, her eyes wild. She held a revolver in trembling hands. James stepped in front of Isla protectively. "It's over, Mother. Let her go." Victoria's expression crumbled. "She took you from me. Everything I built. Gone because of her. You lost me the day you chose control over love," he said coldly. The standoff hung in the air like thunder, until finally, with a scream of anguish, Victoria dropped the gun and collapsed to the floor. The mask had cracked. The madness was laid bare. And James had Isla back. Victoria sat on the cold marble floor of the corridor, her once perfect posture reduced to a crumpled silhouette of grief and madness. The revolver lay abandoned beside her, its metallic surface glinting faintly under the hallway chandelier. Her face, always carefully composed and dignified, was now streaked with smeared mascara and trembling confusion. James had never seen her like this. Not even as a child during his father's funeral. Back then, she'd stood tall and silent, her hand on his shoulder like a statue of strength. But now, she looked small, fragile, unraveled. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she whispered hoarsely, rocking slightly. "I just wanted things to go back to the way they were. Before her. Before everything changed." Isla stood frozen behind James, one arm wrapped protectively around her belly. James stepped forward slowly, crouching near his mother but keeping a careful distance. "You locked her in a room for days, Mother," he said quietly. "You terrified her. You risked your own grandchild's life." Victoria's eyes flicked up, glassy and wide. "You were slipping away from me, James. Every time you looked at her, I saw it. Less of my son. More of hers. Her voice cracked, deep and guttural. I raised you alone. I gave everything. And then she came along and she gave me a future, James cut in gently. A real one. A life not ruled by fear and obligation. Victoria's lips trembled. Her gaze darted to Isla, then back to James. If you walk out with her, I swear I'll end it. Right here. For a split second, the hallway stood still. Isla gasped softly behind him. James felt his chest tighten, his pulse roaring in his ears. His mother was unraveling fast. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was desperation. A scream for control in a world that had moved on without her. He reached slowly into his pocket and pressed the emergency button on the burner phone he'd brought with him. A direct call to the authorities who were waiting nearby, just in case. No one's going to hurt themselves today, he said, inching closer, his voice calm and steady. You need help, Mother. Real help. This isn't who you are. Victoria laughed, a hollow, broken sound. You don't know who I am anymore. Moments later, red and blue lights flashed outside the tall estate windows. Officers arrived swiftly, surrounding the corridor, guns drawn. James stepped aside, hands raised to show peace. Isla backed up, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. Victoria looked around at the chaos she'd summoned, her expression twisting from shock to rage. As the officers restrained her, she screamed at Isla with venom that made everyone's blood run cold. This is your fault. You took him. You ruined everything. James didn't flinch. He wrapped his arm around Isla and held her tightly, shielding her from the fury that no longer had any power over them. Victoria's cries echoed down the halls as she was led away in cuffs. The spell was broken. The madness, unleashed, was now over. And for the first time in weeks, James and Isla could breathe. The sterile scent of the hospital room was oddly comforting to Isla. As she lay in the adjustable bed, and Ford gently dripping beside her, the quiet hum of machines brought a sense of safety she hadn't felt in weeks. Doctors had confirmed that, miraculously, she and the baby were both unharmed. Dehydrated, exhausted, emotionally frayed, but safe. The baby's heartbeat was strong, steady, and every soft thump on the monitor made her cry with relief. James sat beside her, his hand wrapped tightly around hers. He hadn't left her side since they arrived. Though the world outside was in chaos, a media circus erupting over the shocking story of a millionaire's mother kidnapping her pregnant daughter-in-law, James had eyes only for Isla. His heart ached with guilt. He kept replaying the months leading up to the incident, wondering how he had missed the signs of his mother's unraveling mind. Had he been too trusting? Too naive? Or just unwilling to believe that the woman who raised him was capable of such darkness? I should have seen it, he whispered one night, his voice cracking. I should have protected you from her. Isla gently reached for his face, pulling him close until their foreheads touched. You didn't put me there, James. She did. And you found me. That's what matters. Still, the emotional wounds ran deep. They both knew that healing wouldn't come quickly or easily. So they took the first step together. Therapy. A counselor specialized in trauma and family estrangement began visiting them privately. They talked about the fear, the anger, the betrayal. But also about the baby. About how to move forward not as victims, but as survivors. Each session chipped away at the pain, revealing the strength they hadn't known they still possessed. James learned to forgive himself. Isla allowed herself to trust the world again. They cried, laughed, argued, held each other, facing every crack in their foundation so they could rebuild something stronger. Meanwhile, the press had a field day. Tabloids splashed headlines across covers, heir held hostage by mother-in-law, and twisted family secrets of the Holloways. Reporters staked out the hospital, desperate for photos or statements. But the couple refused to play into the spectacle. Their security team issued a single statement confirming the incident and requesting privacy. After that, they vanished from the public eye. Because now, Their only focus was the baby. And the quiet life they were determined to protect. Victoria's trial, though brief, was a spectacle that the public devoured. The world watched as the once glamorous matriarch of the Holloway family was slowly unraveled in the courtroom, her sanity questioned, her motives exposed. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman so consumed by control and obsession that she had been willing to go to any lengths to reclaim the son she believed she had lost to another woman. In the end, the judge ruled that Victoria was mentally unstable. Her actions were deemed a result of deep-seated psychological issues. She was sent to a psychiatric facility, her legal rights stripped, her estate taken over by trustees. The Holloway name, once a symbol of power and respect, now became synonymous with tragedy. James, though relieved to see the legal process unfold, couldn't shake the sorrow that accompanied his mother's fate. It was the closure he needed, but the cost was heavy. The emotional scars, the broken trust, and the grief over what had been lost could never be erased. Determined to move forward, James made sure to sever all ties with Victoria, not just emotionally, but legally. He revoked her access to any remaining financial support, cutting off her accounts and ensuring that she could never hurt them again. It was a final, necessary act of protection, one that made it clear to both Isla and himself that they were free from her reach. Several months later, Isla gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The delivery was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded it. The moment Isla held her daughter, she knew the name she had been dreaming of, Hope. She was a symbol of the light that had emerged from the darkness, a reminder that love and life could thrive even in the most unlikely of circumstances. The couple took a few weeks to themselves, adjusting to their new life as parents, savoring each moment with their daughter. But James knew he couldn't let the pain of the past be wasted. Inspired by Hope's birth, he started a foundation in her name, the Hope Foundation, dedicated to helping women and mothers who had experienced kidnapping, abuse, or crisis situations. The foundation's mission was clear: to provide support, resources, and safe spaces for women in need, offering everything from legal assistance to emotional counseling. James and Isla threw themselves into the work, committed to making sure that no woman or child would ever have to experience the horror that Isla had. As they watched Hope grow, they realized that, while their world had been shattered, it had also been rebuilt, stronger, safer, and full of the kind of hope that could change lives. A year had passed since the nightmare that had once consumed their lives. The days of whispered fear, courtrooms, hospital rooms, and flashing headlines were behind them now, replaced by the quiet rustle of leaves and the soft laughter of a child. James, Isla, and baby Hope had moved into a secluded countryside home just outside Vermont, nestled between rolling hills and thick woods that seemed to cradle them in safety. The house wasn't as grand as their estate had been, but it was full of warmth, laughter, and peace, everything money alone could never buy. The trauma hadn't simply vanished. There were still nights when Isla would wake from dreams with a start, or when James would freeze at the sound of a slammed door. But they had learned to live through the scars, not in spite of them. Each healing moment, each sunrise, each bedtime story with Hope in their arms, was proof that they had not only survived, but rebuilt something real. Their love, once tested in the cruelest of ways, had become stronger, more honest, and fiercely protective of their little world. That evening, the three of them stood together in front of a softly lit ballroom filled with guests. It was the first annual gala for the Hope Foundation, and it was more than just a fundraiser, it was a celebration of resilience. Isla wore a soft emerald gown, holding Hope on her hip, while James stepped up to the podium. The applause died down as he began to speak. "When my wife and I named our daughter Hope," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "it wasn't just for what she meant to us, it was for what we believed the world needed more of. Hope reminds us that light can come after darkness, that safety and love can be restored, even after the deepest betrayals, and that no woman, no mother, should ever be left to suffer in silence." He paused, scanning the crowd. Survivors, donors, advocates. This foundation isn't about me or my family. It's about giving women a voice, a safe space, a lifeline when no one else is listening. And tonight, we stand together in that mission. The applause returned, louder this time, emotional and powerful. Later, under the soft glow of lanterns outside the ballroom, James stood holding Hope in his arms. She giggled, tugging playfully at his tie, while Isla joined them, resting her head on James's shoulder. The stars shimmered above them, the night cool and calm. "We made it," Isla whispered, kissing Hope's tiny hand. James nodded, his eyes misting over. "Yeah, we really did." In that quiet, glowing moment, father holding daughter, mother by his side, it became clear. Their story had been one of heartbreak and horror, but it was also one of strength, healing, and the enduring power of love. No matter how dark the past had been, this new beginning was filled with light. And it was only just beginning.